What happens when an inmate turns her own blood into a weapon, infecting 6 prison guards with HIV before mysteriously dying in her cell just days later? Today, we uncover a case that exposes the dark intersection of revenge, institutional failure, and a death that raises more questions than answers. The Georgia State Women's Correctional Facility sits 40 miles southeast of Atlanta, housing over 1,200 inmates in a structure designed for 800. Built in 1979, this medium-security prison has witnessed its share of violence, corruption, and tragedy. But nothing could have prepared the staff for what would unfold in the fall of 2019, a series of deliberate HIV exposures that would terrorize corrections officers and ultimately claim the life of the woman behind them. Inside these concrete walls, power dynamics between inmates and guards create a constant tension. Respect is earned through fear, and control is maintained through an unspoken understanding that everyone has something to lose. For 28-year-old Danielle Rowe, serving a 10-year sentence for armed robbery and aggravated assault, that understanding was about to shatter completely. Danielle had been diagnosed with HIV 3 years into her sentence. The news devastated her, but what came next would prove even more destructive. The prison's medical staff, led by Nurse Eric Dawson, was supposed to maintain strict confidentiality about inmates' health conditions. However, word spread quickly through the facility that Danielle was HIV positive. Soon, she faced isolation not just from fellow inmates, but from guards who began treating her like a walking biological hazard. Officer Matthew Cole, a 34-year-old father of 2, had worked at the facility for 8 years. He prided himself on treating all inmates fairly, regardless of their crimes or health status. Officer Rachel Nunez, 29, was newer to the job but equally professional in her approach. Officer Terrence Bell, at 41, was a veteran guard known for his calm demeanor, even in tense situations. Officer Dana Reeves, 26, had joined the force straight out of college, with hopes of making a difference in the correctional system. Officer Luis Ortega, 38, supported his family of 4 through his work at the prison. Officer Brielle Sanders, 31, was studying criminal justice part-time while working full shifts. These 6 officers would soon find themselves at the center of a nightmare they never could have imagined. Warden Cheryl Langford ran the facility with an iron fist, prioritizing order and efficiency above all else. Under her watch, incidents were to be contained, problems solved quickly, and media attention avoided at all costs. This philosophy would prove catastrophic when Danielle Rowe began planning her revenge. The first signs of trouble emerged in late September 2019. Danielle's behavior, never exemplary, began deteriorating rapidly. She became increasingly confrontational with staff, refusing direct orders and escalating minor situations into major disruptions. Fellow inmate Tamika Boone, who shared a cell block with Danielle, later testified that Danielle had become obsessed with the idea that the guards were deliberately mistreating her because of her HIV status. What pushed Danielle over the edge remains unclear, but those close to the situation point to an incident in early October when she was denied a request to attend her mother's funeral. The denial came after Danielle had accumulated too many disciplinary infractions, making her ineligible for compassionate release. That night, Tamika Boone heard Danielle crying in her cell, repeating over and over that they would pay for treating her like an animal. The systematic nature of what happened next suggests careful planning. Danielle began studying guard rotations, meal schedules, and daily routines. She paid particular attention to moments when officers would be alone or in vulnerable positions. Most importantly, she began preparing weapons, not knives or conventional prison weapons, but something far more terrifying. On October 15, 2019, Officer Matthew Cole was conducting a routine cell inspection when Danielle Rowe made her first move. As Cole reached to examine items on her shelf, Danielle bit deeply into her own tongue, filling her mouth with blood. When Cole turned around, she spat directly into his face, ensuring the blood-contaminated saliva made contact with his eyes and mouth. Cole's immediate reaction was shock and disgust, but within seconds, the horrifying reality set in. Danielle smiled through her bloody teeth and said, "Now you have what I have." The officer immediately reported to the medical station, where Nurse Eric Dawson began emergency protocols for potential HIV exposure. However, what should have been an isolated incident was just a beginning. Over the next 4 days, 5 more officers would face similar attacks. Officer Rachel Nunez was spat on during a meal distribution. Officer Terrence Bell was attacked while escorting Danielle to a medical appointment. She bit her tongue again and spat blood directly onto an open cut on his hand. Officer Dana Reeves faced her attack during a surprise cell search, while Officer Luis Ortega was targeted during recreation time. Officer Brielle Sanders, the final victim, was attacked as she supervised Danielle's shower time. Each attack followed the same pattern. Danielle would inflict injury on herself to produce blood, then deliberately attempt to transfer her bodily fluids to the officers through spitting, biting, or throwing contaminated saliva. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. These officers went home each night knowing they might have been infected with a potentially life-threatening virus. But here's what makes this case even more disturbing. The response from prison administration was woefully inadequate. Instead of immediately isolating Danielle and implementing emergency protocols, Warden Langford seemed more concerned with preventing news of the incidents from reaching the media. Officers were told to keep quiet about their exposures, while administration figured out how to handle the situation. Nurse Dawson, overwhelmed by the scope of the crisis, struggled to provide adequate medical care to all 6 exposed officers. Post-exposure prophylaxis, the emergency medication that can prevent HIV infection if taken quickly enough, was delayed for some officers due to bureaucratic red tape and insurance complications. The psychological support these officers desperately needed was virtually non-existent. What do you think about the administration's response so far? Should protecting the institution's reputation ever come before protecting the staff? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear your perspective on how this situation should have been handled. By October 19th, investigator Colleen Mears from the Georgia Department of Corrections finally became involved. Mears, a 15-year veteran of correctional investigations, immediately recognized the severity of the situation. She began collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing charges against Danielle Rowe. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage showed several of the attacks, and multiple witnesses, including Tamika Boone, were willing to testify about Danielle's premeditated plan. The charges being prepared were serious. 6 counts of reckless conduct by an HIV-infected person, aggravated assault, and assault on a peace officer. Under Georgia law, these charges could result in decades in prison. Danielle Rowe was facing the possibility of life behind bars, but on October 22, 2019, just 3 days after the investigation began, Danielle Rowe was found dead in her cell. The discovery was made during the morning count by Officer Jenkins, who was not among Danielle's victims. Danielle was lying on her bunk, appearing peaceful, with no obvious signs of trauma or struggle. The initial response from Warden Langford was swift. The cell was secured, the body removed, and a brief statement issued claiming that Danielle had died of natural causes related to complications from HIV. However, the autopsy findings raised immediate questions. While Danielle did have HIV, her viral load was well controlled through medication, and there were no indicators of AIDS-related complications that would cause sudden death. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but no underlying heart condition had been documented in Danielle's medical records. The timing of her death was particularly suspicious. Just as serious charges were being finalized, just as her victims were beginning to process their trauma and demand justice, Danielle Rowe was conveniently silenced forever. Her death meant no trial, no testimony, and no opportunity for the full truth to emerge. The families of the 6 exposed officers were outraged. They had expected to see justice served, to have their day in court, to hear Danielle explain her actions. Instead, they were left with medical bills, ongoing health monitoring, psychological trauma, and a growing suspicion that something wasn't right about Danielle's sudden death. This is where the story takes an even darker turn. Prison employee Marla Eaton, who worked in the administrative offices, came forward 6 months later with disturbing information. Eaton revealed that she had been pressured by Warden Langford to alter records related to Danielle's medical care and the timeline of events surrounding her death. According to Eaton, security footage from the night Danielle died had mysteriously malfunctioned, leaving a 2-hour gap in surveillance of her cell block. Additionally, the logbooks showing which staff members had access to Danielle's cell area during those crucial hours had been modified after the fact. Perhaps most damaging was Eaton's revelation that Warden Langford had held multiple emergency meetings with senior staff in the days following Danielle's attacks on the officers. In these meetings, according to Eaton, Langford expressed concern that the incident would destroy her career and the facility's reputation. Eaton claimed to have heard Langford say that the situation would be much easier to manage if Danielle were no longer able to testify. Tamika Boone provided additional insight into Danielle's final days. According to Boone, Danielle had expressed fear for her safety after learning about the charges being prepared against her. Danielle told Boone that she had received threats from other inmates who blamed her for bringing increased scrutiny to the facility. More concerning, Danielle claimed that certain guards had made veiled threats about what might happen to inmates who made trouble for the system. The investigation into Danielle's death, led by investigator Mears, uncovered numerous inconsistencies. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy noted unusual bruising on Danielle's arms that was consistent with forced injection, though no needle marks were officially documented. Toxicology results, which should have been completed within weeks, were delayed for months and ultimately returned as inconclusive. When the results of HIV testing for the 6 exposed officers finally came back, the news was mixed. 3 officers, Cole, Bell, and Sanders, tested negative and remained negative through follow-up testing. However, Officers Nunez, Reeves, and Ortega showed signs of possible infection that required months of additional monitoring and treatment. The psychological impact on all 6 officers was severe. Officer Cole developed anxiety and depression, requiring counseling and medication. Officer Nunez left her job at the prison and moved out of state. Officer Bell filed for early retirement due to stress-related health issues. Officer Reeves sued the prison system for inadequate protection and medical care. Officer Ortega struggled with alcohol abuse as he waited for his final test results. Officer Sanders changed careers entirely, leaving corrections work forever. Here's what I find most troubling about this case: the complete failure of the system to protect its own employees. These officers dedicated their careers to public safety, and when they needed protection most, they were abandoned by the very institution they served. What's your take on the responsibility employers have to protect workers in high-risk situations? Let me know in the comments. The legal battles that followed were complex and ongoing. The families of the exposed officers filed wrongful endangerment lawsuits against the prison system, citing inadequate medical protocols, delayed treatment, and administrative cover-ups. The Georgia Department of Corrections was forced to implement new safety procedures, including mandatory HIV education for all staff, improved medical response protocols, and enhanced protective equipment for corrections officers. However, many questions remain unanswered. Was Danielle Rowe's death truly natural, or was she silenced to protect the institution? Did Warden Langford orchestrate a cover-up that cost an inmate her life? Were there other individuals involved in either the attacks or the subsequent cover-up? The broader implications of this case extend far beyond one prison in Georgia. It highlights the ongoing challenges of managing HIV-positive inmates in correctional settings, the psychological warfare that can exist between inmates and staff, and the potential for institutional corruption when protecting reputation becomes more important than protecting lives. Danielle Rowe's actions were undeniably criminal and caused tremendous harm to innocent people doing their jobs. However, her death under suspicious circumstances raises questions about justice and accountability that deserve answers. The fact that she was able to carry out 6 separate attacks over 4 days reveals systemic failures that put everyone in the facility at risk. Today, 5 years after these events, the Georgia State Women's Correctional Facility operates under new leadership and enhanced protocols. Warden Langford was quietly reassigned to a desk job with the State Corrections Department. Nurse Dawson left the prison system and now works in private health care. Investigator Mears continues to push for answers about Danielle's death, though the case remains officially closed. The 6 officers whose lives were forever changed continue to deal with the physical and psychological aftermath of their exposures. Some have found peace and moved forward, while others remain haunted by those terrifying October days in 2019. As for the truth about what really happened to Danielle Rowe, that remains locked away in the concrete walls and steel bars of the institution that failed so many people. In a system designed to contain the most dangerous criminals, sometimes the greatest threat comes from the very people trusted to maintain order and safety. The intersection of desperation, revenge, and institutional failure created a perfect storm that destroyed lives and raised questions that may never be fully answered. Danielle Rowe used her own body as a weapon, but in the end, it may have been the system itself that delivered the final blow. This case serves as a stark reminder that in the world of corrections, where power and desperation collide daily, the line between victim and perpetrator can become dangerously blurred. The officers who were attacked deserved better protection. Danielle Rowe, regardless of her crimes, deserved to live to face justice. The failure to protect either group represents a systemic breakdown that continues to plague correctional facilities across the country. What do you think really happened to Danielle Rowe? Was her death natural, suicide, or something more calculated? And how do we balance the need for justice with the reality of institutional self-preservation? Share your theories in the comments below. Your insights help shed light on these complex cases that reveal the darkest corners of our justice system. Like and subscribe for more stories like this daily, because the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, demands to be told.